Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is up, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast. We have an exciting topic that all of you have been looking forward to, wanting to see us discuss or see more of, and that is about mercy culture and the community there and what impacts does it have on the county and the city. But you know the take and how we work here. We do 3 short stories, 1 big story, wins and losses for the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. I have my co-host here, and Zeta, what's good?
Good morning. Great to be here. I think, as you pointed out, we have the 1 big story, which features a guest today. So that guest is journalist and professional writer Eddie Brown with the Fort Worth Weekly to touch on that topic that you just described as that we've been getting a lot of questions and comments about, people asking us to provide more information about what's going on there. So that's our big guest today.
We got a lot of heavy conversations to talk about, so let's go ahead and dive in. You know, the first one clearly we have to address is the 3 people who were killed in the Lake Como neighborhood following Independence Day celebration on Monday night. 8 other victims were injured with multiple other people. The shooters have been identified, and really, we just needed to discuss this in the sense of we kind of talked about this as a loss in last week's episode around how the summers lead to
an uptick in violence.
And then now, you know, this Como incident made it on the New York Times. It's made it in global papers simply because why does the July 4th independence, when America is supposed to be selling freedom, we get upticks in gunshot violence across our country, from Philadelphia to Chicago and other places who had incidents like a Como around the holiday season. And so obviously Como is a great neighborhood and community that has so much to offer and so much support and is calling by the city to do more. And you know, I know this is probably an incident that you saw along your time in city council when communities get impacted by gun violence. How do you feel like this is either different or maybe even sometimes feels the same?
Well, I mean, you pointed out that this is a vibrant, strong neighborhood, and I think that it's important to make clear that the celebration that was planned there by the community had ended before this incident happened, and didn't have anything to do with that. There's also been some discussion about whether it was people from the community or coming in from outside the community. And I think that for the most part, from what I've heard, it's people coming in from outside the community and, you know, causing problems. And that's something that they want, the people in that community want the city to also be a part of addressing. So I know there's a lot of passionate folks in that neighborhood who have been working to improve the corridor, the physical infrastructure along Horn Street. One of the articles that we saw from the Fort Worth Report talks about how business owners are calling for increased resources in Como after the shooting, and that they're uniting against these occurrences of violence. And as you pointed out, this is not just a Fort Worth problem, definitely not just a Como problem. It's a problem across the United States. And I think a lot of it results from lack of resources and underinvestment in full communities. And I think that's something that we need to focus on to try to stem this tide that is definitely a terrible thing that happens.
And everyone involved, I mean, I just can't fathom a 20-year-old and a 19-year-old being arrested and having the situation of feeling this was a decision that you wanted to do and make due to whatever the situation that maybe fueled it. But I just think the 3 who were murdered, 22, 18, 19, these are still relatively kids. And I think we need to think about what we do between the transition of high school to adult for our Black and brown youth across Fort Worth, as we talked about district and demographic data last week, and how do we give them a runway to all these great so-called boomtown opportunities that are happening in our city? Because obviously they're not being connected to it. And I know we got a second story also about an incident. So I know the Fort Worth PD have been extremely busy with incidents all throughout this week. But one we wanted to bring up to you Anne's going to talk about, but it's really we want to bring up to you because we're going to be gone next week. And so it's a developing story, but it's definitely something we should be aware about. So Anne, what do we got?
So there was another incident in Fort Worth where 2 Fort Worth officers killed 2 armed men while investigating illegal fireworks, is the headline of the story that I found on this. Apparently on the 4th of July, there was a Fort Worth police officer paired up with an arson investigator from the fire department that were out on calls to try to stem illegal fireworks in the community. And they came across what appeared to be a fight around 12:30 in the evening in a neighborhood near Main Street and Long. And they engaged what they saw to be 2 armed men, and both of those men ended up getting shot by the officers. And one died on the scene, and I think one died at the hospital later. And then there were also 2 other people that had been shot nearby. And so this... Clearly, in all the articles I've read, I haven't found a conclusion yet. And most of the press has been talking about how it's an ongoing dynamic investigation. There's apparently body cam video that has not been released yet. But I think until we know exactly what happened, I can't really comment any further on that. But it is another incidence of, people dying by gun.
Yeah, and this one possibly, this one now with the officers involved, which just brings a bunch of baggage and history of Fort Worth being involved in that process, and we've just, passed with that happening in historic Southside with Tatiana Jefferson. Like, there's just a lot of stuff here, and based off of the reason why we're bringing it up, and we'll put this in the show notes. NBC5 DFW had a pretty strong, compelling video about this story, and the family saying these guys were friends. Like, the idea is that, the cops weren't even there for them, and they were going like, this is let's just say I don't know how this week will look like, depending on what comes out. Fort Worth PD has probably pinned all of its PR and communication resources to the Como situation, and so they've been way behind on this. We don't even have Carlos Flores, which is in his district's response to this. We've heard from Nettles. Watch your Fort Worth Report, your Star Telegram, and whatever kind of comes from this. But there's definitely questions, and we need a story and a plot of why we did the things and what are our responsibilities to those things that happened in that area. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and move into the third story, which is kind of follow up as well with our demographic conversation that we had last week. We were talking about the far north developments, but then also just the booming area of Fort Worth. 3 articles came out that we wanted to highlight, so Anne's going to take us through those articles talking about development.
So the first article was announcing that East Lancaster, which is an area we've talked about on the pod before, had received $20 million in federal funding for some improvements along that corridor. And this falls in with the plans that have been going on East Lancaster and East Side Transportation Plan. And so this funding, I think, is specifically directed at that transportation component of that plan. But the city is looking at both land use and transportation, reconfiguring the corridor itself, possibly employing something called bus rapid transit, which is kind of buses that run more like trains, but also the land use around that area. So this isn't our wins and losses segment yet, but it is a win for the city that they received that funding in that East Lancaster corridor. And it points out a concerted, intentional effort to plan for growth and development and improvement, which I think is a positive. But that also leads into our 2 other stories that fall into this category. And the first one is that there was an interview with our mayor, Mayor Parker. And now I'm getting a notice saying that I only have 2 more free articles left when I try to pull up this article. But the mayor was interviewed about the growth in our city. The article is titled, "It's the Start. Fort Worth Mayor Promotes Smart Growth. How Panther City Keeps Good Times Rolling as It Grows Faster Than Any Other City." So Fort Worth is on a roll. As everyone knows, and the potential of being the second fiddle in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex has some $2.3 billion worth of new development in the pipeline. And this was reported by the Wall Street Journal recently. And the city has added more people in the last year than any other American metro, making it the epicenter of growth in the fastest growing region in the country. So Mayor Parker talks about this growth and the benefits of it, which I absolutely agree with, but they also talk about other communities that have been fast growing in the past and possibly getting out ahead of some of the things that maybe they didn't get out ahead of. So that comparison of what has happened in Austin and how it's grown so spectacularly fast, and maybe again going back to multimodal transportation, which I will constantly bring up, is something that isn't mentioned in this interview that I think would help us make sure that we're intentional about this growth and not just getting excited about more people moving here and more things being built here. So we have been one of the fastest growing cities for over a decade now, and that momentum is continuing. And we're lucky to have, active folks paying attention to these things in both the private sector and the public sector. And we've streamlined permitting systems that work alongside private partners to make sure that, this can happen in a well thought out way. But again, we touch on the fact that we have a sprawl kind of way of developing in Fort Worth because we are 350 square miles. And they touch on the fact that you have to have robust road infrastructure and water infrastructure to handle the housing that we need. But I think that it's important to also talk about people getting around in ways other than driving, because we are never going to be able to build enough roads or widen roads or pour enough concrete to have every single one of these people that's moving here get around in their own single occupancy vehicle.
Now so with the Southwest Fort Worth article about Southwest Fort Worth in the Star-Telegram by Harrison Mantis, it seems like that's the intentional story that's being talked about, and they wanting to do it right. When you read this article and you saw like the growth rate, what is your concern, and navigate us through that story?
So yeah, that article you talked about, this part of Fort Worth will fuel Metroplex growth for the next 20 years. Are we ready? So it's interesting how some of the things that they're pointing out here about the fast growth in Southwest Fort Worth that was more rural in nature and now is starting to get more growth and development in it is similar to what has happened in North Fort Worth, but possibly we're out ahead and recognizing the need for the infrastructure to be there before we just allow this growth to happen. I think I sent you earlier when we were discussing the growth in North Fort Worth, an aerial photograph of the subdivisions in North Fort Worth that show a lot of single-family subdivisions with curvilinear streets, which are streets that curve around a lot, are not a grid pattern, and end in cul-de-sacs often, and then have walls around them as well. So getting in and out of that type of a development is pretty much only conducive by doing so in a car. And so if we continue to have those kind of subdivisions being built in North Fort Worth in South Fort Worth without intentions of getting around in other ways, we could have a similar situation where there's a lot of people living in an area where the infrastructure is just not robust enough to take care of all of that. So I think this article goes into a whole lot of detail about what's happening in Southwest Fort Worth and whether or not we're ready for that growth. Quite a bit of that development has occurred because of the Chisholm Trail Parkway going in. There's Tarleton University out there, and that's part of what's causing this development to occur.
Yeah, Southwest Fort Worth is projected to add roughly 90,000 people by 2045, according to the data from the North Central Texas Council of Governments. That's the second most behind Northern Collin County in the 12th county metroplex. This is an area that I definitely have friends in, and I see the growth happening. I really don't have too much on top of it to say besides that, I just don't know how we don't make the mistake due to how we are property forward when it comes to developers. like, do we not know if these will have the brick walls and the windy roads and where most of your traffic is in your neighborhood before you even get to the highway? I don't know what the designs would be, but hopefully that's not happening.
I mean, I think that our policies allow those types of neighborhoods to continue to proliferate. I think in Southwest Fort Worth, there has been some mixed use zoning that encourages kind of that mix of uses and having those retail centers that are closer to those neighborhoods. And I think that there has been some intentions by the current council member in that area to revitalize some of the commercial corridors and the commercial areas that are on the aging side of things, and to revitalize those so that people have those resources near them in addition to just the single family homes that are being built, so that you don't have to go as far for those things, so that those things for your daily life are closer by. And if they're closer by and the infrastructure is safe to get there by walking or biking or, I don't know what the other forms of transit are that you could utilize without driving everywhere, I think that would be something that could be thought about and planned for earlier on, and hopefully not end up in a similar situation.
Yeah. Well, if we're growing that fast, you know what McKinney is doing now? They're trying to build an airport. So, we might need to bring our Beecham to start having passengers and not just products.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because the person that heads up aviation for the city of Fort Worth came to Rotary on Friday, and I just learned a whole lot about the 3 airports that we have in Fort Worth. And one of the questions was, are we going to have passenger? And it's quite complicated, but it's not something that I think is going to happen very easily. There's a whole lot of requirements, and runways have to be up to a certain snuff to have certain size of planes land, and there's just a whole lot of things. But there's a hybrid type of passenger travel that could be accommodated at some of those airports, Meacham specifically. But it is a pretty interesting resource that we have in our city, and the gentleman that heads up our aviation department was very well versed and knowledgeable about that, and it was a pretty interesting presentation that I heard on Friday.
Now, I was smoking a cigar out in the backyard watching this Why Texas is Becoming America's Most Powerful State video that came out a month ago on YouTube. And they even brought up Meacham Airport and its power and its influence from a production. We're the #1 exporter in the country as a state, but it's not even close. And even if you put us on a global scale, when it comes to like some of the energy exports, it was crazy to see how influential and, the Texas Triangle is, and just to see it continue.
And we didn't put this down as one of our articles today, but we did briefly discuss it, the conversation about all the freight that comes through Fort Worth.
Yep.
And there was a very robust article talking about how freight traffic can cause delays for folks driving on roads in Fort Worth. And when I first saw the article, thought they were going to be talking about passenger rail, and thought, oh no, this is going to paint passenger rail in a bad light. It's going to be cars against trains, and was glad to find out that it was freight. And my comment on that was, well, we don't want all that freight to be on the highways and trucks, so it's important that freight be on those rails, but we're a big, huge hub for that as well. We expanded the rail crossing that is one of the busiest in the entire country, I believe, in Fort Worth back in 2015, early 2014-15. But I think that that article touched on the fact that trains are longer now, and so they're impacting intersections more than they did in the past.
And there's like no law on that.
The federal law basically says that freight is king, and getting that commerce going overrides any inconvenience that could be happening. There are local people that work with our partners at the different railroads to try to alleviate that. And, having been a part of those discussions in the past, I think that's something that we can still have some influence on. But it's interesting that they've identified exactly what's causing that. And, I sent you a video that I took of trains going by me while I sat and wait for them, because my love for trains is so great that even if I'm inconvenienced by them, I typically just look at the beauty of them and the cool graffiti that might be on them, and just take
Enjoy
a moment.
Yeah. And the Fort Worth Report article will also be in the description as well. as well as that 30-minute video I watched on YouTube about Texas. Okay, well, let's go ahead and dive into the big story. We're here. The moment we've all been waiting for. We're going to sit down with who I believe is a person who's been doing probably the strongest work on tracking the Mercy culture community, and just what it's how it's operating and where it's impacting our city and our county. Our guest today is Eddie Brown, an award-winning writer for several publications, but mainly for Fort Worth Weekly. He's done stuff for Visit Fort Worth, Visit DFW, and Mayworthy. He is super dynamic and really excited to talk to him about the nuance of Mercy culture. So here's Eddie.
My forward story is I grew up in Lewisville, Texas. Went to Lewisville High School, then went to UNT. And when I graduated with my liberal arts degree, I didn't have a job lined up. So I went to Google and I literally Googled, like, what kind of job can I get with this liberal arts music degree? And there was a job posting at Brooke May's Music Store in Fort Worth. And so I started coming out here driving as I was, my last summer. I would drive down here and work in their piano department as a piano salesman. And then once I graduated, I worked for Brooke May's full time. And then they actually went out of business about a year or two later, which was advantageous because that kind of forced me to go all in on teaching private piano lessons. And I was able to do that. And then I was here and I loved it. And Eric Griffey got me my first writing gig for the Weekly maybe 12 years ago, and I've just kind of been focused on writing and teaching ever since then in Fort Worth.
Yeah, and I think just meeting Eddie for the first time today, you might not have known about his piano expertise. Yeah. I learned about it because some kids that went to school with my kids took lessons from Eddie. Okay, so I knew about you as a piano teacher before I even knew about you as a Fort Worth
Most people
Weekly reporter.
Know one side or the other of me, and that's fine.
So I would love to know today's topic. Obviously, we feel like you've been the kind of most on top of the Mercy culture kind of conversation and story, which kind of resurfaced due to the Roots Market and all that stuff. But I would just love, even for you, if if there's a new person moving to Fort Worth and they know nothing about Mercy culture, can you just explain it? Like, what is Mercy culture and why are you concerned about it?
Yeah, sure. So I don't have any kind of background in theology, but my layman understanding of it is that it falls within this family of churches called the charismatic churches, which really focus on kind of experiential, they say corporate is what the word they use, encounters with God. And so they believe things like there are living prophets, and sometimes they'll say that their pastors are a prophet. They believe that with the correct interactions with God, you will be directly rewarded. So it's this a lot of churches, separates, the congregation from God. God is there. But these charismatic churches are very much of the ilk that, God interacts with us and helps us, can actually help us make money. And so it's an interesting take on religion, but they feel that direct connection. You see a lot of speaking in tongues, at these churches. They're an offshoot of the Pentecostal church, and again, I was surprised to learn that that's an offshoot of the Methodist church because I go to Methodist church, often. I didn't realize there's actually this interesting direct connection just as far as the history of these churches go. But they're big on, music and entertainment. They get a lot of young people. It's very flashy. It's very attractive. They're very much into celebrity culture. So, the pastors and elders are always dressed really sharply, and again, they're very charismatic, and they just seem to really draw in a lot of young couples. And that's kind of what's interesting about this place is folks in their 20s and 30s, we know from just polling, they tend to have moved on past this idea that there's something wrong with gay marriage. It's not to say that they're all progressive, but they've moved on from these old social forms of bigotry that say that living people who are in the LGBT community are living in sin, right? Most people in their 20s, 95+%, wouldn't agree with that. But somehow this church is able to blend attracting these young people and kind of, reindoctrinating them in these very old mindsets. Another thing that's really interesting about this church is that it's hyper political, and it's very overt. A lot of churches, if you grew up in a conservative, church, your Baptist minister might talk about conservative values, but they typically didn't overtly say Republican, right? And there are federal laws that restrict that, but this church does not care about the broader concept of separation of church and state, which is kind of terrifying. And if you ask them, and they've said this openly during their church, falsely stating that separation of church and state they would say has been misinterpreted, and they would say the idea was never to separate church from the state. It was to separate state from the church. So that's how they kind of twist the language. They said, well, we don't want government involved. Of course, they're happy to have the tax break, so that's a little hypocritical. But they're saying really this whole precedent is about protecting churches from the state. So they have no problem endorsing candidates openly. And of course, these are all super conservative Republican candidates, not even moderate Republicans. These are all like super far right Republican candidates who espouse conspiracy theories, our county judge being one of them. There's a lot of interesting QAnon code talk that goes on with Mercy Culture's pastors. Whatever the conspiracy of the day is, you'll see him kind of repost that in his Instagram stories. He did one on Disney. He said, "I'm canceling Disney," and there's some really weird, QAnon stuff, that attacks, Disney. And as soon as QAnon will come out with something, Landon Shirley will post something on that same topic. So we know he kind of follows that conspiracy thread. So yeah, it's a church. And if you just look at it, it might look like a normal church. But once you dig into how they act and what they say, it's not normal at all.
Yeah, I think what brought it to our attention mainly was the focus on LGBTQ. And I think there's many people that we know in the community that are concerned about that and the things that they're saying about the LGBTQ community. There's been campaigns in the past several years where candidates who have said that they have connections to this church and then they espouse things like that are terrifying to equal protection and equal rights for the LGBTQ community. So that's kind of what brought it to our attention and to my attention. I don't think I've been following it quite as closely as you all have been following it. But what made you start kind of writing articles about this? Is it mainly just to bring it to people's attention, or you said you ran into, or what was the first impetus to starting to write about this?
Yeah. Well, I kind of stumbled upon it, and as I started writing, our first articles were getting huge clicks because people were already kind of interested in this church. I realized this would be like a year ago, basically, or a little over a year ago. But I stumbled upon it. But people had already been kind of looking into this church. Either they had gone or they just been observing this church online and found its behavior to be pretty peculiar. But what brought my attention to it was the Tim O'Hare Betsy Price primary. And for folks who follow that, Tim O'Hare basically relied on his direct misinformation machine, but he also relied on outside groups who would say they were not affiliated with him, but they would espouse really baseless lies about Betsy Price, calling her a Marxist, abortionist, Antifa supporter, and whatever you think about those issues, to portray, Betsy Price as a communist was totally off base. And it was a total smear campaign that was really based on nothing. But there was a political action committee that formed out of nowhere that was funding the website that had a lot of this misinformation on it. And it was called Tarrant County Conservatives. And so I went to the Texas Ethics Commission website and looked up just some basic filing paperwork to see who's behind this. And the treasurer was this gentleman, Eric Richardson. And then, so I didn't know who that guy was. Actually, I did know the name. I'm sorry, because he ran for District 9. So I knew the name vaguely as a candidate. But then I went to his Facebook page, and I saw he went to a place called Mercy Culture. And he actually says, quote, "I lead worship at Mercy Culture." And then I just started looking at this church, and I realized that I think the first thing that caught my attention was just their open endorsement of candidates and their very forward stance on bashing the queer community. And it kind of just went from there. And I forget the details, but we published an article. I guess it was our first one on mercy culture. It was called "Blessed Are the Bigoted?" ? February 16th, 2022. Got a lot of comments. So people were clearly following this church, and I didn't really realize that. So I'm going to read a quote here from Shaw so people can get an idea of like what he's doing. Elections matter, Shaw recently wrote on his Instagram page. Our tyrannical leaders have stolen our freedoms and indoctrinated our children in schools. So that's the lead pastor in Mercy Culture, and he's telling his congregation to vote. And even there, he's espousing conspiracy theories, right? There's mass indoctrination going on in our public school systems. And again, he has had Tim O'Hare on his stage multiple times. Sheriff Bill Wayborn and Phil Sorrells are all people who have benefited from this church. And these are our top elected leaders. Wayborn's our sheriff, Phil Sorrells is our district attorney, Tim O'Hare is our county judge. And they're aware of the federal laws that should bar them from standing in front of a congregation telling people to vote for them. And they've never hesitated to take that opportunity. So,
yeah, it's interesting that the first story the Weekly did was in 2022, because what really grabbed my attention was the mayoral race that Maddie won, where they had a character of Steve Pinate run. And that was before the Betsy O'Hare. And that's when I'm like, holy smokes. I mean, there was 10% of people, there was a base there.
I think when he announced that he was running, he was outside of City Hall and had a large group of people outside City Hall. I mean, clearly I have connection to that race as I was in it myself in 2021. And in that 2021 also, Eric ran for District 9, and so that's the seat that I had previously. So I was aware of all of that then. Plus, the location of the church is in District 9, and was, there was some back and forth between some of the things that they wanted to do on their property with some of the things that they were, the space of human trafficking, they seem to be very focused on, and they're interested in having some housing for folks that have been experiencing human trafficking. And the question as to whether or not they have the expertise to be working in that space. And I don't know if that's something you've delved into in these articles that you've looked at, the land use that they were proposing on their property adjacent to the Oakhurst neighborhood, and some of the conflicts that have come up between the neighborhood and the things that they're trying to do at that location.
Yeah, I'm definitely in touch with a lot of Oakhurst residents, via email, and I've stopped by there in person a couple of times. I was there when the Oakhurst Neighborhood Association president was getting people to sign a petition to block the basically what the human trafficking facility that they were trying to make, and the vote from the neighborhoods was like overwhelmingly against it. It was like 99%. So I know that neighborhoods, not happy with what the church is doing. That's a whole. One of their main concerns was that you put a facility there that large. First of all, most human trafficking, centers that are that do their jobs well work with a handful of victims at a time. I mean, there's a national average I looked up. It's like 5 to 10 at most. You don't cram. They're looking to do
100 people
or 100. You don't put 100 people in a big dormitory like that for hopefully obvious reasons. But the neighbors were particularly terrified because these victims have. They're seen as property by their quote unquote owners, and these people, the owners, these are violent traffickers who, you put 90, of these victims in one area, you have a lot of violent traffickers that might come for their property, and again, that's how they view it. It's not, of course, how we would view it, but so it's putting that whole neighborhood in physical danger. You could have armed people coming in trying to get their property back, as they would see it. So they had real concerns or just the thought process. I think it's worth noting that Mercy Culture was advertising the address of this place.
Yeah, I was going to say, most of the time you keep that, you don't have people who've experienced that domestic violence or human trafficking. You don't have them in a place where people can go and find them.
Of course. Safe Haven, I've talked to their CEO several times. She would never tell me, nor, where their shelters are. That's a secret. But yeah, so just the fact that they were trying to put this high number of girls and women in together, putting it, near a highway, which is where they're located, where people could easily stop by and try to break into this place. And some of these other factors just really show this neighborhood that this group really does not understand the topic that they're trying to address right now.
And that's like, they're trying to do that shelter. They try to have someone run for mayor. They now roles reversed. Now you have Wilborn O'Hare showing up to their stage. I'm concerned of how big of I think of the Betsy's and the Maddies and like the normal moderate Republicans who had a really control of the city, and now being challenged by the conservative group where someone like Betsy can lose against an O'Hare. So their power seems to. What do you think that dynamic is between the classic Republican power of Fort Worth and them now having to deal with this?
I think, and while I do take them very seriously as a threat to our pluralistic way of life, and I think people should, they're going to run into numbers as a problem. So on the county level, they've been successful, right? And I would say, if you look at who have they successfully put in office, State Representative Nate Schatzline, of course, would be one, and he's an elder there, so that's a direct position. And I would say that they successfully have installed our county judge and District Attorney Phil Sorrells. I would say they did that for Wayborn, but Wayborn's in his second term of office. But they've definitely helped O'Hare get in. So they've installed a Christian nationalist leadership at our county level. So they've already succeeded at that. But where they're going to run into trouble is at the city level, because our voters are we're younger and more diverse in the county as a whole, right? So during the Republican primaries, when O'Hare bested Betsy Price, you had a very low turnout, and you had very old white conservative conspiracy believing people show up. Now that same dynamic will not play out in the city, so they're going to run into much more difficulty trying to do what they've done at the county level, at the city level. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but I would just add that part of that backlash that they're running into is like the near South Side. So they, when they go into areas that are more progressive, that are less inclined to believe, right wing rhetoric, they start running into the realities that you can't brainwash everyone.
I would say that one of the issues at the city level is that city elections are supposed to be nonpartisan. And, that is something that I think is important, but they're getting to be more and more partisan. So, I mean, even back when I ran for the very first time in 2014, it was less partisan then, but the first question that you always get is, what are you? That's typically what people want to know, because they want to be able to categorize you. So I think at the city level, that's probably maybe why you run into that. Going back to this who votes and how many people vote and how much influence you have by bringing together a core group of people to support somebody. I mean, we're all for getting more people to vote and having more people informed and educated so that they are informed and educated in their vote, and which is part of the reason we talk about these topics on this pod. So we're not trying to discourage anyone from voting. We're not trying to discourage anyone from sharing information, but we definitely want people to have resources to find out all of the information and not just go with what one group is telling them, especially if it can be pointed out very clearly that some of the things that they're saying are not accurate. But I think that's partially why maybe it's not as successful at the city level, because I think there are people who find it, the words are escaping me right now, but like find it just distasteful to bring that partisan thing into the city.
The stuff that Tim O'Hare did to Betsy, that whole smear campaign, that would really turn off people at the city level. If they saw that against Maddie Parker, for instance, right? If you're just making up stuff out of thin air and blasting it out there, it might play out well with an older conservative county. These are like the rural areas around Fort Worth is what we're talking about. But once you bring that same approach to more informed, people, I think it's not going to work as well. Yeah. So they might run into some resistance. And again, I think that's what's happening in the Fairmount area.
Well, yeah.
And I think in our recent elections, we had some pushback on that partisan question in some of the council races, because that was pushed on both sides. I mean, in both campaigns. And I think there were people that didn't really like that. But then there's other people who say we should just make it all partisan and just let that go. And I don't agree with that personally. I think that it's once you're in office, regardless of what your personal politics are, regardless of who were the majority of people that elected you, you now represent the entire constituency of that district or that county or whatever it is that you were elected to. And so, in my opinion, it is your responsibility to hear the voices of everyone. And especially, like AJ points out constantly, that we're a purple community, a purple city, a purple county, that you don't just dismiss one half of, or maybe slightly less than half of your constituency. You represent everyone.
We've done, I would say we've done a pretty good job about that in Fort Worth. Whatever you think about, Matty Parker, Betsy Price, they did view their job as being the mayor of everyone. And I would say Tim O'Hare, if you look at what he does not view his job as being the county judge of everyone. He's very clear in who he represents, his constituency, and that's not healthy. We can't, we need to keep Fort Worth, as a kind of a last bastion of civility, where our elected officials at least view all of us as worthy of their support. So
let's say Matty Parker doesn't run again, and now there's other Republicans running, and so you don't see a place where, even though it's a city race, that 10% that Mercy Culture can get a Republican person. Someone decides to step on stage that maybe we weren't ready to step on that stage to win against the more moderate Republican. And so then we have someone more right than Matty in office.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell a story. So I'll be honest, the Tim O'Hare, Betsy Price campaign really shook me up. I was not politically someone who agreed with a lot of stuff Betsy did, but that campaign made me really like her a lot more when I saw this guy come out and just, again, like I've said, several times, just completely make up things that are just, he had nothing he was saying about Betsy that was true, nothing. And Betsy made a point to not return that same approach. She kept her campaign honest. And when I saw that, so I went to when the final votes came in, I went to Betsy Price's victory, campaign. They'll call them whatever, victory parties or whatever. And I was kind of optimistic. I thought, yes. Well, anyway, I was optimistic because I thought, surely, these establishment Republicans are going to come out. And at the party, I saw a lot of what we would call kind of, centrist Republicans. Glenn Whitley was there. A lot of big name donors were there. And yeah, anyway, that night, we found out, that Betsy had lost. And I realized, looking around that room with these Republicans, I might be the only Democrat in there. I actually have a lot in common with these people. Before Tim O'Hare came in, and let's equate Tim O'Hare with Mercy Culture, because that's what's important to understand. It's the same kind of mindset, the same divisiveness, the same worldview. Before Tim O'Hare stepped into the dynamic, I probably would have viewed, Glenn Whitley's, Betsy Price's as people that I have a lot in common with. But it was very clear, and the Murrans, all these kind of big establishment Republicans were there. And I realized I actually have a lot in common with them. And my point is, once they start to try to infiltrate Fort Worth, you're going to see divisions within the Republican Party. So obviously the progressives are very much aware of what these far right-wing folks, the dangers that they present, and moderate Democrats are. But there's a lot of moderate Republicans who saw what happened during the O'Hare campaign that will never support that kind of just malicious lying at the local level. So that's why, I might be wrong, but it's, I think that race, really showed people, what this South Lake, conspiracy laden people are willing to do. And we're going to protect Fort Worth from that.
When we usually talk about Tarrant County, and when you say rural, we're not talking rural. I guess we talked about the city, we talked about rural, but what is your take on the suburbs? Impact and all of Mercy Culture? We talk about O'Hare's from South Lake, a very wealthy place, a very educated place. It's not Texas Sticks where you're getting QAnon. It seems like a normal, safe place to be. But what is, I guess, that power intertwined with the gullibleness of what Mercy Culture is selling?
So yeah, South Lake's definitely a power broker within Tarrant County and surrounding Grapevine, Colleyville area. Those are South Lake for sure, and I think if you combine those are all also pretty conservative areas. Mm-hmm. Again, South Lake being kind of an extreme example of that. But so it's just kind of, I think with Trump, you kind of saw an interesting mix of uber wealthy elites who their interest is money, right? And you have other folks who are poor and they're brought into it for maybe culture war reasons. And they had this kind of common alliance. You see that same dynamic play out in Tarrant County, where you have uber wealthy elites in Northeast Tarrant County. That's where the Tarrant County Tea Party started. It's worth noting. It's been a really powerful base for a certain Tea Party strain of conservatism that has always persisted there. That's where you saw the explosion of critical race theory misinformation came out of Southlake. Because of Tim O'Hare, and so that's kind of a virulent part of our county that is very much aligned with mercy culture. So they just have certain things that they're natural allies. Maybe the people that go to mercy culture can't afford to live in Southlake, but the people in Southlake see a commonality with the ideology of mercy culture because it blends with their worldview. So they're definitely bedfellows.
Yeah. Well, your last article, you were talking about kind of the real estate piece with Mercy Culture. I would love to know more of like what do you see as their strategic plan of either using real estate or donations, or like what do you think their strategy is to get more leverage, more people involved in their, I guess, power?
Well, so I'll quote someone who I spoke to who left Mercy Culture, and he told me that it was very clear that they were being pressured into buying property, whether they could afford it or not. They were, told, if you own a house, sell it, buy a bigger house. If you don't own a house, buy a house. And by the way, here's our realtor/elders. You were pretty much told to do these deals through realtors. And Heather Schott, maintains a realtor's website. Steve Panate is a known realtor. All of the founders of the church, have ties to real estate. So that's the simplest explanation, and I tend to just go with whatever is the simplest explanation is probably the most likely. Landon has been adamant about expanding territory. And so, that, and then, you talk to people in the congregation who get that same feedback. And this gentleman I talked to left because he realized that it's all a big real estate grift. And so it feeds into, I don't know how people don't see that when they're like in their congregation and they're being told to, buy property from the elders. Like it's you have a built-in customer base, I think, is what this church, you have to understand it as. It's a built-in customer base of potential property owners, and they're encouraging them to expand. I'm getting a lot of kind of chatter about them, buying up houses. I know in Oakhurst they're starting to buy homes, and they'll insert people there. And then once they insert people there, those people start talking to the neighbors, and they're trying to build the membership at the church. It's a business operation. I think it should be understood from a business point of view, not something that's like religious in the traditional sense of the word. And we found out that they own probably $1 million condo at the Tower in downtown Fort Worth. Oh, I just wonder if Jesus would do that. They seem to have very worldly ambitions, and again, that's something that separates them, I think, from traditional religion. I grew up in the church, and I'm comfortable in the Christian church, but it was never, my church experience was never about the world we live in. You're taught to not identify. We're in this world, but we're not of the world, right? We're not going to identify with material possessions because there's something bigger waiting for us. And this church constantly redirects people to worldly possessions. And that's just one of several red flags that I just wonder, people who go there, how do they not see this as being disingenuous and antithetical to Christian doctrine? This thing, the stuff with the Near South Side. We had fun with this article, and we took a little bit different approach, with this one. We were kind of using kind of satirical language because we got to mix it up once in a while. But I think what is kind of funny about what they're doing in the Near South Side is the question people ask me all the time is like, what are they thinking? Like, do they not know that this area is, like, first of all, they're aware, this area is very much aware of mercy culture, and these are completely polar opposite worldviews, right? The Near South Side is generally speaking progressive, but particularly on LGBTQ community issues. It's more than just acceptance. Like, they are protective of that community, and if you're in any way a threat to that, they will actively, call you out, and they're protesting every Saturday at this market. We should talk about the market next, but it was the big question is, what were they thinking? Did they misread the room, or well, I mean, I want to get your thought, Ann. So there's two basic. There's probably more than two theories, but there's two, I think, likely theories. A, they inserted themselves in there intentionally because this is the queer community, and they see this area as sinful, and they want to cleanse the area, and they're even trying to cleanse it with Kroger olive oil. Or they're just so oblivious to how they appear to outsiders that they think that their behavior is normal, and they think, well, this is a cool area. We're cool people. We're just going to hang out with the cool people. And they didn't realize that the cool people.
I can speak to the community and the response to that, because that's a community that I'm pretty familiar with. And I had a similar concern. I just don't understand the targeting of these communities that are vulnerable communities. Even if you feel this way, even if you believe that, then live your life the way you want to live it. But don't try to inflict that on other people. And don't try to go into an area that is the safest place in our city for that diverse community and make it less safe. Mm-hmm. That part of it is just shocking to me. And I don't understand people who have strong beliefs inflicting those beliefs on other people in what to me looks like a harmful way. So I can't speak to what their intentions are, whether they just didn't. I mean, clearly the South Side is pretty obviously an inclusive place that's supportive of the LGBTQ community. So yeah, and more so in the last few years. I mean, there's been efforts to make that more visible so that people can feel that when they're there. So I mean, I'm not telling anybody they shouldn't do business or whatever they're trying to do, but just the infliction of harm on other people is what just gets to me. I don't understand it. I think we should all be trying to do good things in the world and helping people. So if you're doing something that helps a small business, that's great. If you're building your own small business, that's great. But don't do it in a way that's harmful to other people.
So talk about the market. So this is, because this kind of seems like, what's the connection to Mercy Culture and the Roots Marketplace that kind of canceled the one vendor?
The direct connection with the vendor Roots Markets and Mercy Culture comes from social media, and that's Landon Schott making a personal call on Instagram for people to come support this outdoor market. And I haven't, it's not like Mercy Culture publishes a list of their members, so I can't say that I know that the owners are members of Mercy Culture, but I can say that they enjoy staunch support from Mercy Culture, which is kind of all we need to know. So this all started with a lady named Carla. If I remember her name right, I've got the story here, but I've spoken with her in person, and basically she was, okay, I'll say it right, Carly Alanese. I apologize, Carly. So she worked, this market is newish. I think it's only 2-3 months old. So Carly, she's the owner of the Lucky Pot Co. So you guys follow her on Instagram and you buy her stuff. She's a lovely woman, self-identifies as queer. And she did a couple of these outdoor markets with this group called the Roots Markets. And after about the third time, somehow this group, which never announced that it does not allow queer people to work with them. They never made that public, right? They sent her an email. And lots of exclamation marks, very self-righteous, we're biblical, and blah, blah, blah. But basically, you're not welcome here anymore, right? So she was shocked. And again, I've talked to her. She's very reasonable. What her big complaint was, well, I don't expect everyone's worldview to match with mine, right? We can have different views and work separately. But what she took issue with was the fact that they never made it clear that they, had these belief systems, basically that they wouldn't work with anyone with the queer community. They never disclosed that. And so it was only after they found out that she was queer that they disclosed that. So for her, it was a lot of things, but she's basically wasted a month of her time working with this group that doesn't acknowledge her basic right to exist. And so that's where she got the most miffed. But it went viral, and blogs around the world actually picked up the story, And I think that's what prompted, Landon to come out publicly and call for his flock to go support this market. So, to be clear, it's another story. I talked to another person there who started kind of a counter market, and she's also part of the queer community. Her name is Madeline Klein. And she didn't realize it was a Christian market, and so she's there, with Carly for a couple weeks, and all of a sudden this old lady comes up and goes, "Oh, I'm so glad that we finally have a Christian market." And Carly's like, "This is a Christian market." She's like, because she's not religious. She's like, I have no problem with it, but I didn't realize I was even part of this overtly Christian market, let alone one that refuses to work with queer vendors. And so, so she's left as well. Madeline, left immediately after that. And a couple did, because it's the near South Side. I think, a lot of the vendors they're working with were queer, and they didn't know they weren't welcome there. And this church, late notice, put that out there. Anyway, so things erupted pretty quickly on social media. And at the next Roots Market, it's every Saturday, there was a protest, a very peaceful protest there. And, Landon Schott in his Instagram message, had the same kind of rhetoric of basically playing the part of the victim, and these queer communities are the aggressors, and we need to go support them because he's basically insinuating, bad things were going to happen. And of course, all these protesters are out there waving their pride flag, right? And so that's what's been happening every week. And probably the customers that are going to this Roots Marketplace are Mercy Culture members. I even recognized a couple of them as that. And so we just have this interesting dynamic, but the community there is refusing to step down. They're going to be protesting every time there's a market there for however long that goes. And it's probably only going to grow. But again, it shows you what happens when these two very different ideologies, physically come in contact with each other, which hasn't really happened before. But they've inserted themselves into this community. So,
well, what is something you would like listeners to do or be mindful of as we navigate kind of this topic and where it intertwines with our economic development to our elections? What would you like more of the 817 pod community to be aware of?
If I had to say one thing, it is to remember why this country was founded. We fled religious persecution from a country that did not have separation of church and state. And that's why historically, Baptists in particular, and a lot of denominations have been huge supporters of this idea of separation of church and state. It's something that's baked into our country, but it's also been supported through Supreme Court rulings. So when we talk about separation of church and state, it is a thing. It's not just an ideal. This is something that this country is based on. And it's based on that because anytime a country has adopted a national religion and become a theocracy, it's been very dangerous for people of all faiths. The Church of England was not welcoming to other Christian denominations, and there were people who were persecuted and killed, and that's why they fled here. So if we care about that history, and if we understand that one of the reasons that churches and religion have flourished in this country is because the government is not entangled with the church, right? It's because of that. Then we need to understand that what mercy culture is selling us is very dangerous. And their worldview does not allow for, of course, other religions, but even other Christian religions. They do not acknowledge Catholics as being Christians. They do not acknowledge any denomination as being Christian. If you want to go to their Mercy Prep School, you cannot be a Presbyterian. You can't be a Methodist. You can't be a Lutheran. It's a non-denominational worldview, and even within that, it's even more narrowly defined. So they only allow for a very tiny sliver of humanity to be considered, quote unquote, on the side of God. And that hopefully is unsettling to people.
So we just want to thank Eddie for joining us today. I think he shared a little bit with us about his Fort Worth story, and I've had connections to Eddie over the years in ways beyond just the journalism, his teaching of young people to play the piano. So there are different sides of Eddie, and we learned about some of those today and got to hear some of the reporting that has gone on at the Fort Worth Weekly in regards to mercy culture, and wanted to respond to those that have been asking us to bring them more information about that. And so we were happy to do that today.
Yeah, I definitely I'm interested in see what is the next, incident where they occur, right? At first Pinate, and then the human trafficking center, and then O'Hare, and now this Roots Market. It's like, what's the next thing? So they're going to be a part of our lineage as we talk about Fort Worth growth, just tracking it. So the fact that we got more people aware of it, I think is a plus, so that they can inform more of their constituents and peers, because clearly people who, like like Carly he mentioned, and the other lady who was just like, oh, I just thought it was a market, and then known to be inside something that looks a lot more dangerous than just a market on Magnolia. And I feel like I am afraid of any Fort Worthian or member of Tarrant County to get that gullible and get that lost in something like that. It just seems so, what he kind of used, fancy or flashy, and welcoming. And so I think talking about that predatorial style of, doing something like that, I think was super helpful for us as active listeners to help our community be more active of what's going on.
We always like to have an informed electorate. So we like to bring information to everyone and point in directions where people can be informed, so that when they make decisions about their community, they have all the information.
Boom. Let's move to wins and losses. And what is your loss?
So my loss this week is that there was a Fort Worth Inc. article that stated these Fort Worth zip codes among the top 10 for home values that have increased the most. And one of those zip codes is the Morningside neighborhood. And I think this is just something that we need to point out, because values in the city's east side have tripled since 2016, according to the Texas Real Estate Guide. The average home in Fairmount Southside and Morningside jumped by 197% between 2016 and 2023, while the top six, Birchall, El Poly, Pyramid, and Mitchell Boulevard neighborhoods have jumped by 204%. So what this means, it's lovely that people's property values go up, because that means their asset, their home has gone up. But since in Texas, our taxes are based on the value of our property, this can be quite concerning. And so I've had several people reach out to me saying, when the city and others bring improvements to an area, how do we make sure that this displacement that could happen because of the values going up so much, that people's taxes go up so much, that they are no longer able to stay in their neighborhoods? And so this is just, for me, another opportunity to point out that we need to make sure that when we're bringing these improvements, that we are bringing the communities that already exist in these areas along with the value and the benefit of those improvements, and not displacing them in the meantime.
I love it. Well, Eddie talked about in his big story, politicians getting on the stages of mercy culture. So for me, I believe a common indicator of those who join the stage of mercy culture are also oftentimes integrated with the Fort Worth Police Association. So my loss is that Jimmy Polizani is running for County Commissioner Precinct 3. He already has over $120,000 for his campaign, endorsed by over 50 Tarrant County Republicans, along with several police and fire associations in Tarrant County. Obviously, I just think it's a loss that we continue to integrate the forces of law enforcement into our elections, and sometimes are also the conduit to the mercy culture kind of community, and people who they kind of get also fired up for their base, which is I just think too much synergistic. I'm not saying Fort Worth PD and mercy culture is a thing, but I see a commonality of those parties integrating even the same kind of voter. And so I just don't think we need another person from the Fort Worth Association on our county commissioner group. So that's my loss. What is your win?
So my win is a little bit associated with what my loss was. There's a Fort Worth Report article that is entitled UTA Student Worries About Panther Island's Impact on the North Side, and here is his plan to change that. So I think we talked briefly at a previous podcast about the conversation that the Fort Worth Report had on Panther Island, and the fact that we're revisiting the plans for that area. And there was a professor from UTA that was on that panel, and he mentioned some of the plans that his students did in a studio class. And this student in particular was the student he was mentioning who brought up the fact that some of the things that were planned for Panther Island weren't necessarily for the community that exists in Northside. And he wanted to make sure that that was addressed. So we'll put the article in the show notes so you can read all of the description, but I'm also going to share that there's probably more to come on this. Hopefully we'll be having a community conversation with the organization that I work for now, Community Design Fort Worth, about Panther Island and some of the ideas that these students came up with for making sure that the future development plans for this area include the community that already exists in this area. So the fact that this is getting so much attention is a win for me. I think that it's important to hear the voices of these younger community members who might not even have been aware of kind of what cities do, what counties do in the past. And these young people are speaking up and saying, this is value. If this development was done in this way, it would bring this value to my community and be responsive to the needs of my community. So I think that's a win.
Yeah, I love that. Connecting the civic engagement youth to real problems while also using it as an understudy of what they're trying to get their education in. It's just a win all around.
Yep.
I love it. My win was that the Cedric Huckabee painting of Opal Lee made a stop in Fort Worth this weekend at the Amon Carter. Obviously, the Kinfolk House is a regular visit for me and my wife, and we love the Cedric's work, but just the fact that we were able to see it before it went was super cool. So we did the Emancipation Museum again, but to see the painting before it went, I thought that was nice. And I think today they're having like the whole, Cedric and Opal there.
Yeah, the Carter has that this afternoon. So if you did not get there on Saturday or Sunday, I think that exhibit ended Sunday, and this podcast drops Monday. So you unfortunately missed that
FOMO.
that great exhibit.
Got to go to DC now. Sorry. All right. But cool, people. Well, there you have it. We completed another episode. We will be out
next week. We're both traveling, so you'll have to do without us for a week, and then we'll be back the following week.
All righty. Have a good time, and look forward to seeing you guys then.
We're out.